Once Upon a Time in America gave us the gang, the loyalty, the violence, and the silence of regret. But what if I told you the real story didn't end in 1984? It only got worse. Behind the legends you remember are lives torn apart by addiction, broken marriages, sudden deaths, tragedies no script could ever capture. Keep watching. Because what you think you know is nothing compared to what really happened. Treat Williams as James Conway. O'Donnell. Richard Treat Williams, Jr. was born on December 1, 1951, in Stamford, Connecticut. At 32 years old, he played James Conway O'Donnell, the determined union organizer and trusted friend whose presence in Once Upon a Time in America added intelligence, loyalty, and moral contrast to the film's criminal world. Even in a supporting role, he helped widen the film's emotional scope beyond violence and betrayal. Unlike many actors of his generation, Treat Williams built a personal life that seemed grounded in loyalty rather than chaos. In 1988, he married actress and producer Pam Van Sant, and their marriage lasted for 35 years, until his death in 2023. That kind of stability was rare in his profession, especially for a man whose career stretched across Broadway, film, and television. But his path was not without struggle. Before that long marriage became the center of his life, Williams had already passed through a difficult chapter in the 1980s when his personal choices began affecting his momentum in Hollywood. At a time when many believed he could become the next major leading man after Hair and Prince of the City, his life drifted off course, and the gap between promise and permanence became painfully real. The deepest struggle he spoke about was addiction. Williams later admitted that cocaine use in the 1980s damaged his focus and disrupted the career he had worked so hard to build. He openly acknowledged that while Hollywood was treating him like a rising star, he was losing discipline behind the scenes and wasting opportunities that might never come twice. That honesty made his later career all the more remarkable. Instead of disappearing, he rebuilt himself slowly and steadily through roles in Everwood, The Phantom, Chesapeake Shores, and many other projects, becoming the kind of actor colleagues respected not because he burned the brightest, but because he endured. Treat Williams died on June 12, 2023, at the age of 71 after a devastating motorcycle accident in Dorset, Vermont. According to investigators, a car turned into his path and left him no time to avoid the collision. He was airlifted to Albany Medical Center, where he died from severe trauma and blood loss. He left behind his wife, Pam Van Sant, their 2 children, and a career that had lasted 5 decades, with an estimated net worth of around $10 million. Robert De Niro as David Noodles Aronson. Robert Anthony De Niro was born on August 17, 1943 in Manhattan, New York. At 39 years old, he played David Noodles Aronson, the deeply conflicted gangster haunted by memory and guilt in Once Upon a Time in America. His performance became the emotional backbone of the film, turning a crime story into a haunting reflection on regret and lost time. Behind that controlled intensity on screen, De Niro's personal life unfolded with far less stability. His marriage to actress Diane Abbott in 1976 eventually ended in divorce in 1988, followed by a long and complicated relationship with Grace Hightower, whom he married in 1997. Their relationship was marked by separation, reconciliation, and ultimately another split after more than 2 decades, with financial disputes and public legal tensions surfacing along the way. These emotional fractures quietly ran parallel to his career highs in films like Goodfellas and Heat, suggesting that while his professional life remained disciplined, his personal world was far more fragile and difficult to control. Health challenges added another layer to his story when, in 2003, De Niro was diagnosed with prostate cancer. The diagnosis came at a time when he was still actively shaping his legacy, forcing him to confront mortality in a way that echoed many of his later roles. Years later, that sense of fragility returned in a more personal form when his grandson, Leandro De Niro Rodriguez, died in 2023 from a drug overdose involving fentanyl and cocaine, a tragedy that brought a quiet but profound grief into his life. As of 2026, Robert De Niro is 83 years old and remains active in the industry, continuing to take on selective roles while also overseeing ventures like the Tribeca Film Festival and his Nobu restaurant empire. With an estimated net worth of around $500 million, his legacy is secured not only through iconic performances in Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, but also through his enduring presence as a cultural figure. Danny Aiello as police chief. Aiello Daniel Lewis Aiello, Jr. was born on June 20, 1933, in Manhattan, New York. At 49 years old, he played Police Chief Aiello, a law enforcement officer overseeing the criminal underworld in Once Upon a Time in America, whose brief but memorable role highlighted the constant pressure between crime and authority. Even with limited screen time, he reinforced the film's sense of corruption, surveillance, and the tightening grip of the law around the gang. What made Danny Aiello especially moving as a performer was that he understood struggle from the inside. Before acting gave him a second life, he had already known hardship, labor, and responsibility, and that seriousness carried into his marriage as well. In 1955, he married Sandy Cohen, and unlike so many actors whose private lives collapsed under fame, Aiello held on to that marriage for more than 60 years. That stability became one of the most admirable parts of his life, especially because he came from a broken home himself after his father abandoned the family when his mother lost her sight. This long marriage gave his life a center even as his career moved through films like Moonstruck and Do the Right Thing. His later years were marked less by public illness than by deep personal grief. The heaviest blow came in 2010, when his son Danny Aiello III, a stuntman and actor, died from pancreatic cancer. That loss stayed with him because for a man so tied to family, losing a son was not something success could soften. Then, in the final chapter of his own life, Danny Aiello suffered a sudden decline after a short medical treatment and developed a rapid infection. Danny Aiello died on December 12, 2019, at the age of 86 in a hospital in New Jersey after a sudden illness caused by an infection following brief medical treatment. He left behind his wife Sandy, his children, and a screen legacy that stretched from The Godfather Part 2 to Do the Right Thing, the film that earned him his Oscar nomination and confirmed how powerful he could be when given the right role. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was around $3 million, modest by Hollywood standards, but fitting for a man whose value was never really measured by money. James Woods as Maximilian Max Berkovich. James Howard Woods was born on April 18, 1947, in Vernal, Utah. At 35 years old, he played Maximilian Max Berkovich, the ambitious and ultimately betraying friend whose choices reshaped the fate of everyone in Once Upon a Time in America. His sharp, unpredictable performance gave the film one of its most unsettling and memorable antagonists. Woods's personal life mirrored that same instability. He married costume designer Catherine Morrison Pahoa in 1980, but the relationship ended in divorce just 3 years later. His second marriage to Sarah Owen in 1989 lasted only a few months, reinforcing a pattern of intense beginnings followed by rapid collapse. These repeated breakdowns in his personal relationships seemed to reflect a deeper restlessness, one that contrasted with his focused performances in films like Salvador and Casino. Tragedy struck in 2006 when his younger brother, Michael Woods, died of cardiac arrest at the age of 49. The loss led Woods to file a lawsuit against the hospital, believing negligence had played a role in his brother's death. Alongside this grief, Woods became increasingly involved in public controversies and legal battles, including defamation lawsuits and highly polarizing political statements. These ongoing conflicts gradually shifted public attention away from his artistic achievements and toward the turbulence surrounding his personal and public persona. As of 2026, James Woods is 79 years old and lives a far more reserved professional life, with occasional creative projects such as his 2024 music release, Hear the Thunder Crack. His estimated net worth stands at around $20 million, built from decades of film, television, and voice work, including Videodrome and Ghosts of Mississippi. Burt Young as Joe Gerald Tommaso DeLuise, known professionally as Burt Young, was born on April 30, 1940, in Queens, New York. At 42 years old, he played Joe, a street-level associate and loyal member within the gang in Once Upon a Time in America, whose rough presence reinforced the film's world of danger, loyalty, and survival. Though the role was not one of the largest, he brought a gritty authenticity that made Joe feel like a real part of that violent underworld. Burt Young's private life carried a sadness that never really left him. He married his wife Gloria, and together they built a family life away from the glamour of Hollywood. But that life was shattered in 1974 when Gloria died. From that point on, he lived as a widower, raising their only daughter while carrying a loss that seemed to settle permanently into his face and his work. That kind of grief shaped the emotional truth he brought to films like Rocky and The Pope of Greenwich Village. After years as a Marine, a boxer, and an actor known for working-class intensity, his body eventually began to fail him. Yet instead of disappearing into bitterness, he turned more seriously toward painting and writing, building a quieter identity beyond acting. Burt Young died on October 8, 2023, at the age of 83 at Northridge Hospital Medical Center in Los Angeles. The direct cause of death was cardiac arrest, with myocardial infarction, atrial fibrillation, and atherosclerosis listed as contributing factors, and he was later buried at Mount St. Mary Cemetery in Flushing, Queens. His estimated net worth at the time of his death was around $2 million, and in the end, his legacy felt far richer than that. A life marked by service, loss, stubborn endurance, and a sadness he somehow turned into art. Elizabeth McGovern as Deborah Gelly. Elizabeth Lee McGovern was born on July 18, 1961, in Evanston, Illinois. At 21 years old, she played Deborah Gelly, the distant yet deeply influential love interest of Noodles in Once Upon a Time in America. Her performance gave the film its emotional contrast, representing a life that always seemed within reach, but never truly attainable. Unlike many of her co-stars, McGovern's life did not collapse into chaos, but it was shaped by quiet, decisive choices that changed everything. In her early years, she had a turbulent relationship and engagement with actor Sean Penn, a connection filled with intensity but also conflict, as both were rising stars with strong personalities and clashing ambitions. She ultimately walked away, choosing stability over volatility. In 1992, she married British director Simon Curtis, and she stepped back and moved to London, deliberately reshaping her career into something calmer. After years away from the center of Hollywood, she returned with Downton Abbey, where her role as Cora Crawley reintroduced her to global audiences. It was not a comeback built on reinvention, but on patience and consistency, proving that her career was never truly lost, only paused, waiting for the right moment to reemerge. As of 2026, Elizabeth McGovern is 65 years old and continues to balance acting with her musical pursuits as part of the band Sadie and the Hotheads, while occasionally returning to the screen in projects like Downton Abbey, the grand finale. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, her life stands in contrast to the chaos often seen in Hollywood. Joe Pesci as Frankie Minaldi. Joseph Frank Pesci was born on February 9, 1943, in Newark, New Jersey. At 39 years old, he played Frankie Minaldi, a volatile and unpredictable gangster whose presence added tension and danger to Once Upon a Time in America. Though not the central figure, his performance reinforced the film's brutal, unforgiving world. Pesci's personal life, much like many of his characters, was marked by instability beneath a controlled exterior. He was married 3 times, including a highly publicized marriage to actress Claudia Harrow from 1988 to 1992, with whom he had a daughter. Their relationship ended, but the story did not. Years later, Harrow was convicted and sentenced to prison for her involvement in a murder-for-hire plot against her next husband. Although Pesci had no connection to the crime, his name was inevitably dragged into the media storm, placing him in a narrative he never chose. His later engagement to model Angie Everhart in 2007 also ended abruptly, reinforcing a pattern where long-term emotional stability seemed just out of reach. Physically, Pesci's career was shaped by the demands of intense roles. During the filming of Raging Bull, he suffered a broken rib in a fight scene with Robert De Niro, an injury that, remarkably, he would re-aggravate years later while filming Casino. These repeated physical setbacks reflected the price of the raw authenticity he brought to films like Goodfellas and Casino, where his performances felt less like acting and more like controlled explosions of energy. As of 2026, Joe Pesci is 83 years old and lives largely outside the public eye, having stepped away from full-time acting since his initial retirement in 1999, with rare returns such as The Irishman. His estimated net worth is around $50 million, built from decades of iconic roles across both crime classics and unexpected comedies like Home Alone. Darlanne Fluegel as Eve. Darlanne Fluegel was born on November 25, 1953, in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. At 28 years old, she played Eve, the seductive yet emotionally fragile woman entangled with noodles in Once Upon a Time in America. Her role added a layer of intimacy and vulnerability to the film, revealing how relationships in that world were often driven by desire, power, and quiet despair. Behind her striking beauty was a life built on constant reinvention. Fluegel married Michael Ira Small in 1983, a rodeo rider and actor, and they remained together for over 2 decades until their divorce in 2004. While their marriage appeared stable from the outside, her career told a more complicated story. Transitioning from a successful model to a serious actress was never easy, as she struggled to be taken seriously in Hollywood despite strong performances in films like To Live and Die in L.A. and Running Scared. That quiet tension defined much of her professional journey, forcing her to work harder than many of her peers just to prove her depth. The most devastating chapter of her life came not from scandal, but from illness. In her mid-50s, Fluegel was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease, a cruel and progressive condition that slowly erased memory, identity, and independence. For more than a decade, she battled the disease as it gradually took away the very qualities that had defined her: her intelligence, her presence, her control. Darlanne Fluegel died on December 15, 2017, at the age of 64 at her home in Orlando, Florida, after a long struggle with Alzheimer's disease. She was cremated, and her ashes were returned to her family, marking a quiet and intimate farewell rather than a public one. Tuesday Weld. As Carol Susan Kerr Weld, known to the world as Tuesday Weld, was born on August 27, 1943, in New York City, New York. At 39 years old, she played Carol, the damaged, provocative woman in Once Upon a Time in America, exposing the film's darker mix of desire, humiliation, and manipulation. Her performance added a raw, emotional danger to the story, making Carol feel less like a side character and more like a reflection of the film's moral decay. What made Tuesday Weld so haunting on screen was that pain was never something she had to fake. Her life was marked by instability long before adulthood, and that sense of emotional fracture seemed to follow her into her relationships. She married screenwriter Claude Hartz in 1965, but the marriage ended in divorce in 1971. She then married actor and comedian Dudley Moore in 1975, and although the pairing attracted enormous attention, it also ended in divorce in 1980. Her third marriage, to violinist and conductor Pinchas Zukerman in 1985, lasted longer but also collapsed, ending in 2001. Over time, those failed marriages reinforced the same image that had defined many of her roles in films like Play It As It Lays and Looking for Mr. Goodbar. Her emotional wounds began frighteningly early. As a child, she was pushed into modeling and acting to help support her family after her father's death, and that pressure came at a devastating cost. She reportedly suffered a nervous breakdown at 9, fell into alcohol abuse at an age when most children were still learning who they were, and even attempted suicide at 12. Those experiences left deep marks on her adult life, and although she built a respected acting career and earned nominations for an Oscar, an Emmy, and a BAFTA, there was always a sense that her success had been built on survival rather than peace. As of 2026, Tuesday Weld is 83 years old and has long remained out of the spotlight after retiring from acting, with her final screen appearance dating back to Chelsea Walls in 2001. Her estimated net worth is around $5 million, a modest figure for someone once considered one of the most magnetic actresses of her era. William Forsythe as Philip Cockeye Stein. William Forsythe was born on June 7, 1955, in Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn, New York. At 27 years old, he played Philip Cockeye Stein, the volatile childhood friend whose bitterness and unpredictability added a dangerous edge to Once Upon a Time in America. Even in an ensemble filled with strong faces, his performance helped give the gang's early world a harder, more wounded pulse. Forsythe has always been one of the more private men in this cast, and that silence around his personal life only deepened the intimidating image he carried on screen. What is publicly known is that he was previously married to Melody Munyon, with whom he had children, and that he later married Teresa Forsythe on June 30, 2024. That reserve may have protected him from the kind of public marital wreckage that damaged so many actors, but it also left his private life largely hidden behind the same hard-shell audiences saw in films like The Rock, Dick Tracy, and Gotti. Decade after decade, he kept returning to tough, bruising roles in projects like Boardwalk Empire and Justified, building a career on force, menace, and emotional control. That kind of longevity says something important about him. He may have played broken men, killers, and gangsters, but in real life he seems to have survived Hollywood by giving away very little of himself. As of 2026, William Forsythe is 70 years old. He is still active enough to maintain a public presence, and recent event notices show he was expected at a convention appearance that has now been moved to 2027, suggesting he remains engaged with fans even while working more selectively. Estimates of his wealth vary, but some outlets place his net worth at around $8 million, reflecting a long career built on persistence rather than flash. James Hayden as Patrick "Patsy" Goldberg. James Hayden was born on November 25, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York. At 28 years old, he played Patrick "Patsy" Goldberg, the streetwise member of the gang whose presence helped ground Once Upon a Time in America in the raw energy of youth, loyalty, and doomed ambition. His performance carried a tragic weight even before audiences knew how cruelly his real story would end. Hayden's personal life was already coming apart when his career was finally beginning to break through. Public accounts from the time describe him as speaking with his estranged wife on the telephone in the final moments before his death. That emotional fracture mattered because Hayden was not some fading actor at the end of his road. He was a rising talent, fresh from powerful stage work, and the collapse of his private life seems to have run tragically alongside the very moment his professional future was opening up. The darkest part of Hayden's story was addiction. In 1983, the same year he appeared opposite his close friend Al Pacino in the Broadway revival of American Buffalo, he was playing a heroin addict on stage while reportedly struggling with heroin off stage as well. According to contemporary reports, he had received a standing ovation only hours before he was found collapsed in his Manhattan apartment, with a syringe and glassine envelopes believed to contain heroin nearby. It is hard to imagine a more painful collision between art and life than that. James Hayden died on November 8, 1983, at the age of 29, just weeks before what would have been his 30th birthday. He was pronounced dead at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center after what was widely reported as an apparent heroin overdose, and later accounts place his burial in Calvary Cemetery in Queens. Richard Bright as Chicken Joe. Richard James Bright was born on June 28, 1937, in Brooklyn, New York. At 45 years old, he played Chicken Joe, a cold, calculating hitman whose presence reinforced the ruthless violence at the heart of Once Upon a Time in America. His performance helped anchor the film's darker tone, reminding audiences that death in this world often came suddenly and without mercy. Bright's personal life was far quieter than the dangerous men he portrayed, though not without its own turbulence. He was married to actress Rutanya Alda, and together they built a family with their children, Jeremy and Diane. Unlike many actors chasing fame, Bright remained a character actor throughout his life, moving between stage, television, and film with steady dedication rather than celebrity ambition. His career included memorable appearances in the Godfather trilogy as Al Neri and films like Marathon Man, roles that made him recognizable without ever placing him fully in the spotlight. Health issues followed him in later years as he suffered from emphysema, a chronic lung condition that affected his breathing. Even so, he continued working, sometimes incorporating oxygen equipment into his roles as a prop, blurring the line between performance and reality. Richard Bright died on February 18, 2006, at the age of 68 in Manhattan, New York, after being struck by a tour bus while crossing the street. The accident was sudden and devastating. He was hit by the rear wheel of the bus and pronounced dead shortly after at Roosevelt Hospital. No criminal charges were filed, though the driver's license was suspended for failing to yield. He was survived by his wife and children, leaving behind a career defined by quiet consistency rather than stardom. So Once Upon a Time in America, 1984, was more than just a film. It was a story of time, loyalty, and the quiet tragedies that followed each character long after the credits rolled. Decades later, their lives have taken paths filled with success, loss, and unforgettable endings. Which story touched you the most? The rise, the fall, or the life that could have been? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more then and now stories that reveal what time really does to legends.